Synergy by Coco-chan and the Blue Spanch. Part 1. Into the Unknown. The recording was possibly the last one that King Alfor had made before he had died, and time and circumstances had not been kind to it. The image was blurry and tended to jump unexpectedly, and much of the message was lost to static. He looked as though he had been under a terrible strain at the time, and there was a thread of despair in his voice that he had tried and failed to conceal behind an air of stern dignity. Despair and a terrible sorrow that transcended the years and brought tears to Alura's eyes that she did not bother to hide from the paladins. "Can you clean that up any?" Hunk asked Pidge, who shook her head. "I don't know enough about Altean recording technology to risk it." "Kuran?" "Nope, this is as good as it gets. The housing on the terminal had cracked, and there was grime all over the circuitry. We're lucky that we've still got this much of it." "Play it again," Shira said, frowning at the screen. "There's something important in this." Kuran keyed the message to replay, and they all paid careful attention as Alura's father spoke again. "Alura, my beloved daughter, if you are viewing this, then I am all ready. Give me. But it had to be done. Zarkon has gone. Wow. I didn't know Zarkon could go, Lance muttered. "I heard that it takes years of training." "Ow! Shut up!" Pidge said, threatening to smack him again. "Other paladins have gone ahead to conceal theirs, but the need for secrecy has required them to go alone. They will not be coming aside. I have already sealed the black line within the castle, and will soon take my own to its place of safety. I do not doubt that you will be able to find it later, and the others will in their various locations. However, despite the retrieval of the lions, any candidates that you find for them will be untrained. I doubt very much that any of our military academies will survive what is coming. The training dex systems should be sufficient to but if you still find yourself over the planet Zempidri in the system that bears the same name, Pakambari sector, quadrant 3 in the Tuloni region, you will find some aid you. Mighty weapons that the Galra cannot guess. Only time will tell if your brave young heroes will be but it will be worth the effort. I love you and will always love you, my daughter. Farewell." "Mighty weapons," Lance said. "I like the sound of that. Sounds like somebody stashed a cache of goodies. Ooh, like maybe bigger wings, or a really big gun, or a robot hero cape." Shiro sat back, scowling at Alfor's blurred, weary image. "Maybe, maybe not. I don't like his mention of the Galra. Were these weapons stolen from them or just hidden? Or are they something completely different? He mentioned the training deck," Keith pointed out. "Maybe the weapons are for us, like backup Bayards or something." "Ooh, or maybe it's like a secret order of space ninjas," Hunk said enthusiastically, striking what he thought was a martial pose. "And they'll teach us space ninja stuff. You can have cosmic powers when you're out in the cosmos, can't you?" Alura was frowning as well, but thoughtfully. "I think that I may have heard the name before. Zempidri. Kuran, didn't your grandfather like to take vacations there?" Kuran tugged on his mustache with a nostalgic smile. "He did indeed, princess. A pretty planet," he said, "although a bit wild, and had some interesting wildlife. He was very fond of some of them. Don't know if it's still the same, though. That planet's fairly close to the Galra core worlds. Not too close, though, and it's got some odd spatial anomalies scattered around the region that make navigating that place a bit of a hazard. Let's see if I can get a little current information, eh? For all I know, the Galra could have solved those puzzles, paved the planet over, and the cache was discovered in someone's vegetable garden." "I hope not," Lance said darkly. "My cousin Carlos was pretending to dig for pirate treasure in a vacant lot once, and came up with 60 pounds of smuggled cocaine. The neighbors were kind of upset, but hey, pirate treasure." "Just not the good kind," Pidge added. "Nah, that was the $500,000 they found underneath the drugs, and the cops wouldn't let him have any of it, and he kept yelling finders keepers at them until they asked Aunt Lucia to take him home." "Yeah, that sounds like Carlos," Hunk said. "Didn't he decide that he wanted to be a cop after that?" Lance grinned. "Yeah, until he found out that they weren't allowed to keep the treasure either." "Any luck, Kuran?" "Yes, actually." Kuran indicated a screen which showed an unfamiliar star system. "We're just close enough to Empire space to pick up the local newsnets and public navigational chart archive. Zempidri's still there, and apparently untouched. There's nothing in that system to interest the big industries, apparently, and the living worlds don't seem to be worth the bother of colonizing. They've just sort of forgotten about the place, which is a little odd. Handy for us, although they do patrol it now and again, probably to train new pilots in how not to get your ship yanked apart by an unexpected singularity. We'll have to be careful, however. That system's deep within their home space, and doubtless they've broadcasted the castle's image to every starship captain out there, to say nothing of the Lions. Stealth would be our best bet, I'd say. One of the scout shuttles, do you think, Princess?
We can't risk the Lions, Allura said dubiously, studying the screen. But we also need any advantage we can get. We are, I fear to say it, rather badly outmatched. If Father left us something to find on Zampedri, then we must at least look for it. I can hide the castle among the moons of that gas giant there. It's within the range of the 2-man shuttle, and close enough to our target that the rest of us can come to help if you run into trouble. All we need to do now is to decide who goes. That meant who among the paladins, of course. The big and unspoken fact was that neither Allura nor Coran could come along, since they would be needed on deck to pilot the castle. Shiro, at least, was used to this sort of thing. I'll go. Anyone want to keep me company? I'll go, Keith said, only to collect a dirty look from Lance. No, I will. It's my turn to check out the new fancy weapons or space ninjas or whatever. No, I will, Pidge said. It might be a machine of some sort, and neither of you are qualified for figuring those out. Keith snorted. If it is, it'll probably be for Voltron, and you won't be able to move it. Hunk brightened up. I'm good at moving heavy things. Lance humphed. Sit down, Hunk. You already got the Balmera trip. Give someone else a shot. We all had to do the Balmera trip, and nearly got blown up by that laser lizard thing, Pidge snapped. If this'll get us something that can make it easier to deal with monsters like that, I don't want any of you breaking it by mistake. The discussion dissolved into chaos at that point as the 3 boys all took exception to that remark. Shiro sighed and glanced at the princess. Take us to Zampedri, Princess. We'll discuss it while you drive.
This wasn't a good idea, Hunk muttered grumpily for the 3rd time. They'd drawn lots in the end, and he'd won. Or lost, depending on who you asked. Granted, Shiro replied shortly, throwing the ship into a tight curve to avoid the plasma pulses from the enemy cruiser. But if we can find that cache... The ship shuddered as a bolt struck them a glancing blow, and the control board lit up with warning lights. Among them was the one that told him that the comms were dead. Shiro muttered a curse and altered their course again. There was no way that the little scout shuttle would be able to fight the much larger craft, and escape was starting to look pretty chancy as well. Fortunately, this particular solar system had several planets that would support human life. Unfortunately, none of them were inhabited. The largest and lushest looking of those was their target world, and some twerp of a Galra warship captain had decided to patrol along the scenic route today. The ship shuddered again from another near miss, and Hunk had to hold on to his lunch as his co-pilot threw their damaged scout on what looked to be a suicidal course through a meteor swarm. Their little ship squeezed through the field of jagged space junk without too much trouble, but the Galra cruiser was forced to slow down and try to clear itself a path. With a sigh of relief, Shiro ducked down around a pair of small moons to approach the nearby planet. Hunk didn't much like the look of it, but he kept his opinions to himself. He knew better than to jostle the older man during re-entry. They made it down in one piece, although the ship would have liked to dispute that. Shiro had not been idle when the training sessions were done for the day, but had been studying the castle's scattering of small craft. He was a gifted pilot, but there were limits. Having your ass shot off by the enemy was one of them, and he was glad that he had the one engineering-trained member of the crew with him. "Can we fix it?" Hunk asked, examining the torn and scorched hull plate near the drive tubes. "You tell me," Shiro said, opening the rear cargo compartment and hauling out a large crate. "Coran made sure that we had a repair kit. I know that you've had a look at the manual for these." "Yeah, a look. In between all that training and fighting and stuff. Please tell me that the repair kit has instructions." Shiro popped open the crate, fished around inside, and handed him a booklet. "It's our lucky day." More or less. It was written in Altean, but the diagrams were very clear, and with only a little bad language, they were able to get a good start on the project at least. The rumble of an alien spacecraft cutting through the upper layers of the atmosphere forced them to stop. A thin white streak in the sky well to the west marked the passage of their pursuer. "Damn," Shiro muttered, the fist of his prosthetic clenching reflexively. We'll have to conceal the shuttle somehow and wait until they either land or give up. Can you see anything useful?" They had come down on a wide stretch of grasslands, dotted here and there with small, dense clumps of palm-like trees, tangled up at the bases in some sort of vine. Other than that, there were only endless fields of tall, yellowish grasses. Very tall grasses, he noticed, much taller than any earthly grass other than bamboo. "The vines, maybe," Hunk said dubiously. "There's a patch just over there. Give me a hand with those?" The vines were large, stiff, gnarly, and thick-stemmed, with blue leaves as big and round as dinner plates, but Shiro's battle arm was able to sever several long straggles with ease. The vines draped easily enough over the shuttle and hid it quite handily from view. "Good enough, I suppose," Shiro said, glaring at the empty greenish-blue sky. "Come on, let's—" "Hunk? What's the matter?" Hunk was staring at something behind him. "Shiro, don't make any sudden moves just now, but there's a really big lizard thing standing right behind you. 2 of them." Surprised, Shiro turned, albeit carefully. He'd never even heard them approach. That was rather impressive considering the size of the beasts. It was as though someone had taken a pair of Arizonan horned lizards and rebuilt them more on the lines of a tiger without leaving out any of the spikes, then expanded them to about the size of an Indian elephant and added 6 large, intelligent blue eyes. Understandably, Shiro froze in place. They examined each other for a long, nervous moment, and then one of the lizard beasts chirped. A chirp like the biggest bird ever born, but a chirp nonetheless, and the other answered with an ear-boggling collection of twitters, grunts, and whistles that sounded almost like language. The first one responded in kind, showing fangs longer than Shiro's fingers, and then they both lowered their broad, spiky heads to sniff at him. They were quite gentle about it, and Shiro was even more surprised when they emitted high-pitched, squeaky little sneezes and began giggling like little girls. Exactly like little girls, which is not a sound that should be coming out of a creature that was covered nose to tail in spines. Hunk got the same treatment a moment later, and stood as still as a stone and sweating in terror while the lizard beasts giggled in his ears. "Well, they don't seem hostile," Shiro ventured, carefully patting a lizard on one flank. It glanced at him and sniffed at his arm thoughtfully, venting a grunt. It chirruped at its partner, and they both looked up at the sky, in the direction that the Galra cruiser had been headed, Shiro noticed. The second lizard hissed and bobbed its head, then turned broadside to Hunk and extended a long, scaly foreleg, an obvious invitation to mount up. "Wait, what?" Hunk asked, backing away. "You want us to ride you? But—" The other lizard gave him a hard nudge in the rump, nearly knocking him into the first lizard's shoulder, and then gave Shiro a significant look out of 3 azure eyes before, very pointedly, extending its own foreleg. Shiro sighed. "All right, we get the message," he said, and carefully climbed up the offered limb. He settled himself down cautiously among the rows of sharp spines and scales, gripping the creature's horns gingerly and offering up vague prayers of thanks that they were both wearing their armor. The lizards paused for just long enough to let their riders find a good seat, and then took off at a gallop with Hunk howling in protest. They ran like big cats did, he noticed after a little time, with huge, surging strides that sneered at the miles, almost effortless and far faster than one would think possible for creatures of that size. Tree clumps whizzed by at a frightening rate, and the grasses were one long stream of yellow, eventually giving over to larger copses of taller trees with spreading blue fern-like foliage. Hidden in the thickest part of this spotty woodland was what appeared to be a dwelling of some sort. It was large and looked like a collection of blue eggs clustered around a much larger ovoid, with each egg shape ringed with windows around the pointy end. The front door was open, and there was a savory smell of cooking in the air. The 2 lizards slowed to a halt outside of this fragrant doorway and chirped loudly, allowing their riders to slide off. Hunk fell to the ground with a thud and a groan. After a minute, he heaved himself upright with a visceral growl. "I smell bacon," he said grimly. "That had better be bacon, or I'm going to—" His words were lost when his lizard uttered a peremptory bark. All right, I'm coming, a woman's voice said from inside. If that last batch burns, Soluk, you're eating every last one yourself. Oh, my goodness. The person who stepped out of the house was tall, purple, and rather furry, with pupilless yellow eyes and large pointed ears. Shiro stared, having seen something like her before, although in nothing like so pleasant a situation. You're a Galra? She smiled, or perhaps smirked would have been a better word for it. Yes, sorry, it's a chronic condition. I'll try not to get any of it on you. Soluk, Tilla, just where'd you find these two? Hunk snorted in amusement. I like her, he murmured to Shiro, as the two lizards chirruped and rattled at their friend. Shiro would have snapped a warning at him, but the Galra female spoke first. Tilla and Soluk here tell me that they found you on the plain, playing with shield vines, she said. I assume that you were concealing a ship? Yes, Shiro said cautiously, watching the woman for sudden moves. Good. I saw that cruiser fly by a little earlier, despite the fact that I've got a ward-off beacon going. We don't often get patrols out here. There's nothing at all of interest to the Empire on this world, but I dislike having to run nosy people off while I'm busy. She eyed them curiously for a moment. I don't recognize your kind. Where did you come from? I'm not sure that we should tell you that, Shiro said warily, although Hunk made a sound of protest behind him. She smiled again. That's all right. I enjoy a puzzle. Just who you are isn't as important right now as what you are. That armor is very distinctive, isn't it? You're a couple of Voltron's paladins. Shiro hissed and dropped into a fighting stance, his battle arm at the ready. And what are you going to do about that? She shrugged. Invite you in for lunch. Even with my dragons here helping, I can't eat a whole batch of tenruk buns alone. Relax, man, I'm not going to make a fuss. Emperor Zarkon's been on the throne for far too long, and I'm perfectly happy to sit back and watch you boot him off of it. Someone will have to, sooner or later, or he'll wind up destroying the Empire himself. Not everybody approves of him, or of that psychotic witch of his. Come on in, boys. I'm Lezenne, by the way. With that, she turned on her heel and went back inside, leaving the two men feeling somewhat at a loss. Hunk shrugged and followed his nose, with Shiro trailing uncertainly behind. The interior of the building was large and open and arranged around a sunken central area stocked with soft furnishings and bits of odd equipment or statuary placed here and there, all of it spotless and comfortable looking, although one fixture seemed strangely out of place. It looked something like the medical pods in Allura's castle, but it was horizontally positioned instead of vertical, and it was occupied. Shiro paused for a look, and then had to stare. He knew this person from somewhere. His mind filled with flickering images and sensations. He was in the arena again, gasping for breath as he fought for his life, tasting blood on his lips and smelling his own sweat, while something huge and armored and rageful screamed at him, yellow eyes glaring insanely in a face distorted with pain and fury. He felt a hand on his shoulder and had to stop himself from smashing Hunk to the floor. He leaned on the unit, breathing heavily and trying to calm his thundering pulse. The Galra contained inside the medical machine was unconscious, and in very poor shape. He'd been an imposing figure once, long in the leg and broad across the shoulders. He was gaunt now, his bones visible under the fine purple fur. His face was lined with exhaustion and old pain, and his body was a webwork of pale scars. "Don't tap on the glass, please," Lezenne said sternly. "He needs his rest." Where did you find him?" Shiro asked hoarsely. "Who is he?" Lezenne laid a hand on the med unit gently and answered in a sad voice. "Barzurak Space Hab, although everybody just calls it the Center. It's where Zarkon has his throne and where Hagar likes to test out her little toys. Modri here used to be the commander of a battleship. He wound up being demoted to lab animal for the heinous crime of being a sensible person." "Wait, what?" Hunk asked. "What did he do?" Lezenne's yellow eyes glared disapprovingly at Modri's scars. He was on patrol in Oporitu space when his destroyer ran afoul of a Gantarash pirate fleet. Very nasty, your basic Gantar privateer. and their ships are tough enough to pose a real threat. Modri here had to make an executive decision. He could either fight it out, defeating the pirates and losing most of his crew in the process, or he could run back to the nearest garrison for backup. He chose to run, not willing to risk such bad odds. The Emperor didn't approve. Wait, so he got busted for not getting his ship wrecked and his crew dead? Hunk demanded. Doesn't that, defeat the whole purpose? Lezenne nodded. It does, although the survivors would have been stronger, or at least all the more paranoid for the adventure. All Zarkon cares about is strength. It's all he's cared about for 10 millennia, and that obsession will not only be his downfall, but everyone else's. Modri here was given over to the witch Hagar and her druids, and they did some monumentally horrible things to him. He lasted perhaps 3 fights in the arena before something faster, more skilled, or luckier took him down. He was still alive when they dumped him into the Charnel pit, and I was able to pull him out before they sent the bin into the incinerators. As you can see, I've had to more or less rebuild him from the ground up, and he may never fully recover. Shiro shuddered, rubbing at his battle arm. I might have been the one that broke him. Sorry. I don't remember much, but... She stared for a long moment at the arm he held up. Go sit down at that table by the window while I rescue the buns. I'll want to look at that. Tanrook buns did indeed taste much like bacon, and Hunk piled into them with a will after Lezenne had demonstrated their wholesomeness by eating one herself. Shira was a little more circumspect, but it was hard going. Altean food was nutritious, but it didn't taste at all palatable most of the time, and they'd seemingly never gotten the hang of crispy things. Not surprising, Lezenne said when Hunk commented on that. If you look at an Altean's teeth, you'll see that they evolved to eat mushy things. They've got a nice set of incisors, but they have no canines and only 2 pairs of bicuspids. All of the rear teeth are flat. Their tastes and cuisines certainly suggest that they evolved in a swamp somewhere. You've eaten Altean cooking? Shiro asked curiously. Alas, yes. My mother had an Altean cook among her servants when I was little, and the dear lady would occasionally make little treats for herself. She'd give me a taste whenever I caught her at it, just to keep me quiet. Lezenne tapped her own sharp teeth with an equally sharp nail. Nearly glued my mouth shut, in fact. I soon learned to keep secrets in other ways. Let me see your arm, please. I promise that I won't do anything sinister to it. Hunk stared at her in disbelief while Shiro undid the catches on his armor. I thought the Alteans were extinct. It's been 10,000 years, you know. Yes, I know, Lezenne murmured, taking Shiro's battle arm in her hands, carefully examining the articulation of the fingers. Zarkon was not at all pleased when that king of theirs broke Voltron up and hid the parts. Altea and most of its colonies were smashed, save one. The survivors of those destroyed worlds were rounded up and marooned there. Every last ship that could get into orbit was destroyed, and everyone who knew how to build more were slaughtered. The planet itself was sealed inside a very large force shield, and that whole solar system remains heavily patrolled to this day. They're alive in there, but they aren't going anyplace. Huh. Now this is interesting. Oh? Shiro asked. Lezenne flexed the wrist of his arm and peered hard at the joint. I would guess that your world is a very recent Imperial acquisition, or else it's still in the evaluation phase. This is a compatibility test. Does it hurt to use? Any loss of dexterity or range of motion? How about the battle systems? Shiro and Hunk both tried to speak at once, glanced worriedly at each other, and then Hunk sank down in apologetic silence. The arm feels normal most of the time, and acts normal as well. The battle systems were painful at first, they've gotten less so over time. What do you mean by compatibility test? Lezenne humphed and switched her attention to the elbow, examining the spot where human flesh met alien technology. It's the standard operating procedure and has been for ages. Whenever the Empire finds an inhabited planet, it's watched and studied for a while so that the military will know what amount of force to use to take that world without too much trouble and expense. Do your people have starflight yet, or any off-planet colonies? We've got a base on the moon and some space stations, Hunk replied. That's about it. Shiro here was part of the first manned scientific mission to Kerberos,
That's one of the moons orbiting our outermost planet. When the Galra kidnapped them, that was a little more than a year ago.
Just on the brink of extrasolar travel, then. No wonder they're taking their time with you. Lezenne flicked him a smile. Peoples at that particular point of development can carry some nasty surprises from alien invaders. I expect that you and your teammates were enslaved and handed off to the Druids for study, yes? And wound up in the arena as per usual. Shiro heaved a shuddering sigh and nodded. I did. The others, I think they were sent to a work camp somewhere. My memories of that time are spotty at best.
Probably trauma. Hagar and her butchers tend to be rough with victims, and I wouldn't put it past her to play around a bit with your psyche a little. The fact that you were in their hands for a year without going mad is a good sign. You were a test subject, to see whether or not Galra technology was compatible with your biology. Since your body hasn't rejected the arm, I'd say that it's a success. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Hunk asked.
Lezenne snorted. Yes to both. It'll keep them from labeling your kind as worthless, although if your people do wind up being conquered, your best physical specimens will spend a lot of time being turned into battle machines and monsters. It's better than the alternative, though. Worthless races are generally enslaved, encapsulated like the Alteans until a use is found for them, or eradicated and their worlds either colonized or stripped of anything of value. The Empire has bad habits. Hunk stared at Shiro's arm in horror.
Can you replace it? You know, take it off and grow him a new one, like Modri over there?
Lezenne released Shiro's arm and handed him another bun.
Eventually. My equipment's of decent quality, but it's old and slow, and the ship's not set up for a proper upgrade. He'd have to permit me to take a genetic sample, then wait a year or two while I map the whole thing out so that I'm sure that I know what I'm doing with it, then wait several weeks while I clone him a fresh one. After that, he'd have to undergo 2 surgeries, one to remove the mechanical one and another to graft on the replacement, and then he'd have to spend another uncomfortable and frustrating year or 2 healing up, strengthening the muscles, and improving his control of it. I'm sorry, but you just can't rush some things. Poor Modri would say that you'd gotten off very lightly. There really wasn't all that much of his original body left, and what there was badly damaged. Shiro accepted this with a stoic nod and put his gauntlet back on. Fine. I can live with this. For now, at least. Good, because you don't have much of a choice. My turn to ask a question, gentlemen. Lezenne fixed them both with a golden-eyed look. How did you find the lions? Zarkon's been tearing up great swaths of the galaxy for 10 millennia looking for those things. Hunk smiled ruefully and grabbed another bun. We didn't, really. They found us. The blue one had been hidden on our planet. When Lance popped the shield on it, we all sort of crowded in, and then it took over and brought us all the way out here. Ah, the histories do mention that the lions were a Gestalt engine, and had minds of their own. They really were a magnificent piece of work, and unique, or there would be a very great many more Voltrons flying around. Lezenne scowled at nothing in particular, and the Empire would have been smashed long ago. I very much doubt that you found the others without help, though. Hung and Shiro shared a long look, and then Shiro shrugged. The Blue Lion brought us to an abandoned castle, or so we'd thought. As it turned out, there was an Altean princess, her seneschal, I think, and some mice and cryopods in the basement. They'd been there since Voltron had been hidden. That surprised Lezenne. Really? Princess Allura? Well, it looks like old Alfor didn't make all of the mistakes he could have. Oh, dear. You'll want to tell her that her people still live as soon as you get back to base. It'll get the temper tantrums out of the way as quickly as possible. Hunk had to smother a laugh, but Shiro gave their hostess a quizzical look. Temper tantrums? Lezenne nodded. Altean royalty, according to the histories, were a remarkably responsible bunch and took their duties to their people seriously. She's going to want you to go and liberate them, quite forgetting that freeing a captive world does not end with a flashy battle in orbit. Even if you were able to chase the fleets of Galra warships out of the system, you would have to stand guard over the planet at all times to keep them from coming back. The Empire's too big. All Zarkon would have to do was threaten some other world, and you would be forced to go and stop him.
While you're off doing that, he'd destroy the Alteans utterly. He's probably holding them in reserve in order to make a trade, their lives for your lions, and she'd fall for it. Never mind that he'd simply go ahead and wipe them out anyway. She's not going to be rational about this for some time, and it will probably drive a wedge between her and your team. It's better to work it out now than it would be later, when things would be much more fraught. Shiro nodded in agreement. We need allies, preferably ones with big ships and big guns. Right now, it's just us and the mice, and a race of short people with big curly horns who still use stone tools. We're in the same boat anyway. Our home planet's at risk too. Probably even more at risk since we've got nowhere to go if the Galra attack. Yeah, allies would be good. Like rebel groups. Hunk grinned and struck a pose. Hey, Lezenne, can you tell us if there's any good rebel armies around? With laser swords and big hairy guys and some really cool fighter ships? Lezenne was shaking her head. There are always small bands of desperados, but they're usually fighting for their own survival on just one planet. Historically, larger, better armed and equipped groups used to pop up about once a century, but after one of those came a little too close to assassinating him, Zarkon stopped allowing that sort of thing. These days, if any given people produce more than a given number of malcontents, that race is destroyed. We Galra have pretty much gotten used to having an eternal emperor. The other races have learned to cope. They don't like it, however. If you can find a spacefaring race that would welcome seeing their imperially appointed provincial governor reduced to a small pile of carbon ash, then by all means oblige them. Just make very sure that they're willing to back you up on your other campaigns. A lot of them won't be, out of fear of reprisal. What about the Gantarash pirates? Shiro asked. Absolutely not, Lezenne snapped. Gantars are completely untrustworthy and will steal the lions if you give them even the smallest opportunity. They're cannibals as well, and view the entire galaxy as their buffet lunch. Their neighboring races actually applauded Zarkon when he fire-polished their homeworld. The Shukas would be a better choice, or the Hurus, or better yet, the Uzuskai. I've met their governor, and he's a classic tyrant. Thanks, Shiro said, gazing grimly at his mechanical hand. I have to ask this, and I'm sorry for having to do so, but is any of what you've just told us true? Lezenne smiled broadly. An intelligent question. Very good. All of it, but you only have my word for that, of course. It's easily enough tested. Send a long-range probe into the Altean home system and see for yourself how things are over there. Confirm all data before you trust it. You can't afford to make mistakes at this time, not while you're operating alone. Yeah, by the way, just what's out there that you think is going to bust up the Empire? You've sort of been dropping hints. Hunk gave her a hard look. I thought you wanted Zarkon gone. This time Lezenne laughed, causing one of the lizard creatures to peer curiously in through the window. Lezenne tossed it a bun and grinned fiercely at Hunk. And another intelligent question. I am most encouraged. The lions have chosen some good ones this time. I do indeed want Zarkon ejected from the throne, and Hagar with him. If at all possible, by the way, get rid of her first. Zarkon depends on her rather more than he should. If you can manage that, the difficulties that will follow his fall will be identifiable and solvable as his empire falls apart without him. He has plenty of sons, only one of which is in any way suitable as an heir, you see, and I wouldn't give that fool boy 15 minutes on the throne. If he is not defeated soon, well, there will be worse things than that. There are signs that the Emperor is going insane, and Hagar's most recent experiments have been producing things right out of a madman's worst nightmares. Gigantic monsters that can crush ships with their bare hands and destroy whole cities in one go, for example. And I've heard rumors of a device that can turn a whole world into an ashy wasteland in less than 5 minutes. Hunk shuddered. We've met a couple of the first kind. Those were bad, but we figured out how to deal with them. I don't like the sound of the other one at all, though. We need to get back, Shiro said, pushing himself up out of his chair. Thank you for your hospitality, Lezenne. You've been very kind, but we've got people waiting for us. Naturally. You've brightened my otherwise dull day as well. Lezenne nodded at Hunk. Would you like the rest of the buns to take home? Yes, please, Hunk said eagerly. A few minutes later, they were walking out toward the grasses again, Hunk happily clutching a large wrapped parcel under one arm. Shiro was a little annoyed with him about that, his military training making him naturally distrustful of the enemy. Still, those buns had been awfully good after weeks of Altean food goo, which was why he wasn't objecting too strenuously. Lezenne had gone off to find the lizards and persuade them to take the pair back to their shuttle. 15 or 20 miles was a long way to walk through rough and trackless terrain. They paused at the edge of the yellow prairie, enjoying the afternoon sunlight and fresh air while they could. It was a nice world, Shiro mused, if you didn't mind the neighbors. A whiff of bacon on the air told him that Hunk was sneaking another snack. "I hope you got the recipe," he said mildly. "Yep," Hunk replied in a slightly muffled voice. "It's really easy, too. It's gonna be great. I heard Keith say the other day that if Zarkon himself would offer to trade a BLT for Koran, he wouldn't hesitate. I think that it was the bowl of orange squilge that did it. Maybe I'll start messing around in the kitchen some more after we get back." Shiro chuckled. As a soldier, he knew very well the effects of a bad cook on the morale of the troops. "I'm sure that they'll appreciate it. We'll need comfort food anyway, if Allura reacts to the news as badly as I think she will." "Yeah," Hunk replied grimly. "She will, too. Waking up and finding them all gone was harder on her than she's letting on. Paige is gonna pitch a fit, too. She's only in on this so that she can find her family, and she's not gonna like it if Allura starts making demands." "We'll work it out," Shiro reassured him. "It'll be—" "Halt, paladins, and surrender at once!" The harsh command made them jump, and Hunk dropped the packet of buns as the grasses around them erupted with Galra soldiers, their commander grinning triumphantly. There were too many of them to fight, and running would do no good. "On your knees, alien filth, or suffer the wrath of—" "Guns down!" Another voice cracked like a whip, and it was a moment before the two paladins realized that it belonged to Lezenne. "Guns down, I said, and instantly! Didn't you idiots register my beacon? No trespassing, it said. Research in progress, it said, and here I find you trampling around in my testing area. Would you care to explain yourselves?" She was genuinely angry, and Shiro and Hunk got another shock when the Galra officer and his men dropped to their knees before her, the armored soldiers bowing their heads humbly. "My lady," the officer quavered, "we did register the beacon, but we were tracking enemies of the Empire. Allow us to take these aliens away, and—" "Mine," she snapped in a voice that made the fellow cringe. "I was just about to run a test on them, actually, and I don't appreciate the interruption." A test?" the officer whimpered. "Oh, goodness, yes. Quite a good one. I'd like to see how a pair of Voltron's own would do against a pair of these." Tilla and Soluk loomed up suddenly out of the trees, looking nowhere near as friendly as they had earlier. Zampidri prairie dragons. Their hides as tough as blast shielding, they can bite through the hull of a starship, and they have a venom that is instantly lethal to just about every carbon-based life form known to science. They are sensitive beasts, however, and don't like having an audience while they work. "Go away." "Lady, please, you will doom us," the officer begged. "Our commander told us to bring him those paladins or die trying. He will not take no for an answer." Lezenne gave him a long, considering look that wilted him where he knelt. "Who is your commander?" Sensing a way out of this mess, the officer replied quickly. "Harquin, my lady." "Harquin," Lezenne hummed consideringly. "I've heard of the man. Very well." Shiro and Hunk tensed in anticipation of betrayal. Lezenne surprised them again. "You may tell him that you found me here. You will tell him that I have not seen an unauthorized spacecraft. You will tell him that I will not tolerate further interruptions of my work. You will not tell him that I have the paladins, and neither will your men. You may, however, give him this." She stepped forward and handed him a small book. "A copy of one of my observation logs of the nearby solar system of Dorlamin. The fourth planet from the sun is a barren, lifeless little rock, but there is a large deposit of banlaconite in the metallic state in the northeastern hemisphere. The log holds the location, topographical details, mineral strata, and prospectus for working the lode. Tell him that I've put a curse on that book, however. If he takes it from you without proper compensation for you and your men, he will go blind in both eyes, and no replacement he finds for them will function for more than a day." The officer's head nearly touched the ground, he bowed so low, and his troops copied his example. "You are generous, my lady. Thank you." "You're welcome. Now get you gone." Shiro and Hunk watched in helpless amazement as the enemy fled back into the grasses, and watched the cruiser rise up into the sky not 5 minutes later. Lezenne sighed. "I hate having to do that," she muttered. "It always seems so unfair." Not to be rude or anything," Hunk asked warily, "but are you a princess?" Lezenne laughed, making the dragons snort and whiffle. "Worse," she said. "I'm a woman." "I'm not sure I follow you," Shiro said, eyeing her with new respect. She smiled wryly and rubbed Tilla's chin with one hand, making the dragon hum in pleasure. "It has to do with our biology. Have you ever noticed that while you'll find Galra men all over the place, you'll hardly ever see a female? When my kind are born, they're born in job lots, up to 10 cubs in a birthing sometimes, and almost all male. They're very little, but they grow very fast. A woman might have over 100 children in her lifetime, but she'll only have a handful of daughters. As a result, we're rare and precious, and tend to be treated like queens. As if that weren't bad enough, the boys tend to be big and strong and run together in aggressive packs. We females are much more solitary, far more studious, and every last one of us has talents that other races might call magic. Every Galra female is a witch, and some are naturally better at it than others, but what it all boils down to is that what we want, we get. The male who pleases a female the most is the male who gets to be a father, see?" Hunk was blushing furiously and trying to hide it by hunting around for the packet of buns, but Shiro nodded slowly. "That does give you an unfair advantage, doesn't it? I'm not going to complain if it gets us back home, assuming that you will let us go home, of course." "Certainly, although there is that test I was going to run. Tilla, Soluk, those interlopers are gone." The 2 dragons stepped forward with immense dignity, sniffed with the air of seasoned connoisseurs at the 2 paladins, sneezed, and giggled. Lezenne grinned. "Congratulations, you've passed. Prairie dragons are remarkably good judges of character and are a very great deal smarter than they look. Just give our guests a ride back to their ship, please, and I'll make us a fresh batch of Tenruk buns. Before you go, however—" She took a small, flat object out of a pocket in her tunic and handed it to Shiro. "This is a secure channel communicator. If you have interesting questions for me, don't hesitate to call. I may or may not be able to answer them, but I will do my best." "Thank you," he said, taking the device. "We won't forget this. Goodbye." "See you later," Hunk said, clambering up onto Soluk's back. "I hope so," she murmured, watching the 2 riders pelting off into the grass.